In the distant future, the galaxy was a place of fragile peace. After centuries of war, destruction, and near extinction, the different civilizations of the universe had finally come together under a single agreement, one that promised to preserve the delicate balance of life across the stars. This new era of peace, however, came with certain compromises. Among these, one decision would forever alter the way humans and other species interacted with each other and with the universe itself. The Galactic Council, a collective of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy, had made a decision that would prove to be more controversial than any other: the complete and total ban of firearms in space. Their reasoning was simple, at least on the surface. Firearms, with their explosive force and destructive power, pose too great a risk in the vast expanse of space. The potential for accidental detonations or catastrophic battles in the fragile environments of space stations or on peaceful planets was too high. With weapons capable of causing mass destruction, the Council believed that keeping peace would be impossible. So, they imposed the ban, ensuring that any future conflicts would have to be settled through diplomacy, not violence. To many, this seemed like a wise and forward-thinking move. The idea was to encourage the galactic community to develop new forms of conflict resolution that didn't rely on the threat of violence. With advanced technology, the Council believed that new, non-lethal methods of control and negotiation could be developed, ones that didn't endanger entire populations. It was an idealistic vision, built on the hope that diplomacy would rule over force. However, there was one species that was not so easily swayed by the logic of the Council: humans. Humans had always been a species shaped by conflict. Their history was marred by wars fought with firearms and weaponry that scourged their planets and nearly destroyed them on more than one occasion. But it was also the same species that had rebuilt itself from the ashes of destruction, constantly adapting and innovating. To them, firearms were not just tools of violence. They were symbols of survival, power, and most importantly, freedom. A ban on firearms was seen as an affront to their identity, a limitation on their ability to defend themselves and maintain control over their own destiny. The announcement of the ban sent ripples of disbelief through humanity. They had been proud of their military strength, built over generations of warfare and peacekeeping. Now, with this sudden decree, they found themselves vulnerable in a universe that had grown increasingly hostile. The ban was particularly hard to accept for the human military. They had always relied on firearms as the backbone of their defense strategies. Without them, how would they protect their colonies or defend themselves against the ever-expanding alien forces? In the weeks following the ban, public outcry erupted across Earth and its colonies. Protests broke out in cities and spaceports. Calls for rebellion were heard from the outer colonies, where humans had long lived in isolation, and their defense was crucial to their survival. The ban wasn't just seen as an imposition, it was seen as a direct threat to their way of life. The fear wasn't just about self-defense, but about what the ban represented: a loss of power and control, a surrender of humanity's ability to shape its own future. In the corridors of Earth's military leadership, the situation grew tense. How could they protect humanity's interests in space without their most reliable means of defense? With the Galactic Council tightening its grip on the galaxy, humanity faced a future where they could no longer rely on brute force. But humans were nothing if not resourceful. They would not simply accept defeat. Instead, they began to focus on what they had always done best: adapt. As whispers of rebellion spread through the military and beyond, the seed of defiance was planted. Humanity refused to be disarmed, not by law, not by anyone. They began to look for creative alternatives, methods of defense that didn't violate the ban, but still allowed them to defend their colonies. It was this moment of uncertainty, this crisis, that would spark the ingenuity that had always defined humanity. But for now, the galaxy watched in suspense, wondering what humanity would do next. And as the tension mounted, the question lingered in every mind: how would humans survive without the very weapons that had once defined them? Would they succumb to the restrictions placed on them, or would they find a way to fight back? The answer was still unclear, but one thing was certain. The humans were not going down without a fight. As the Galactic Council's ban on firearms took hold across the galaxy, humanity found itself in uncharted waters. Their old methods of protection and survival, once relied upon for defense against the growing threats in space, were no longer available. With the ban in place, Earth and its colonies were forced to adapt, or risk being overwhelmed by alien forces who were less constrained by the new rules of engagement. The challenge was massive. How could a species so deeply reliant on its military might find a way to defend itself without the tools it had mastered for generations? The answer would not come easily. The initial reactions were filled with frustration and anger. Military commanders and defense leaders across the human colonies were in shock. For years, they had trained with weapons, prepared for battle, and fortified their positions against every conceivable enemy. But now, their entire strategy was useless. The ban wasn't just a political move. It was a direct threat to their ability to maintain control over their worlds and their way of life. Without firearms, they were left vulnerable, powerless against alien threats that continued to grow in strength and number. But humans were not ones to give up. While many were angry, others were determined to find a way to fight back. A quiet rebellion began to simmer behind the scenes, a rebellion not against the Galactic Council, but against the idea that they were powerless. The first steps toward resistance were not loud or overt. They started in the laboratories and workshops, with engineers and scientists quietly brainstorming, tinkering with technology, and asking one question: how could they fight without firearms? It didn't take long for the first creative sparks to appear. Humans had always been inventive, and in this moment of crisis, their resourcefulness shone brightly. Engineers began to focus on adapting existing technologies into new forms of defense. The solution didn't lie in creating something that mimicked firearms. It was about rethinking the very nature of defense and offense. How could they fight without killing? How could they protect without breaking the laws set by the Council? The answer, it seemed, would come not from weapons of destruction, but from weapons of ingenuity. The first breakthrough came when a group of scientists working with energy fields developed a new kind of weapon, the electromagnetic pulse, EMP blaster. While the Galactic Council had banned the use of projectile weapons, they had overlooked the potential of energy-based systems. The EMP blasters didn't fire bullets or explosives. Instead, they emitted focused bursts of energy capable of disabling enemy ships and technology. They weren't deadly, but they were highly effective at neutralizing threats. With these EMP devices, humans could now take down hostile fleets, disrupt enemy systems, and protect their colonies without violating the Council's ban on firearms. At the same time, military engineers were exploring the potential of non-lethal kinetic energy weapons, devices that used compressed air or magnetism to launch high-speed projectiles capable of stunning or immobilizing targets. These weapons weren't designed to kill, but to incapacitate, disarm, and neutralize threats without causing permanent harm. The human military, once dependent on lethal force, had found a new creative way to defend itself without firing a single shot. However, the greatest spark of creativity came from the civilians, a group of former weapons engineers and inventors, some of whom had been sidelined by the military's traditional approach to defense, began to develop a new class of defense technology that could be used not just by soldiers but by ordinary citizens. These devices ranged from handheld electromagnetic shields, which could block incoming attacks, to energy disruptors that rendered enemy technology useless. The civilians, driven by the need to protect their families and homes, quickly began to spread their inventions across the colonies. The human response to the ban was not just about military defense. It was about survival. It was about the refusal to accept a future where they were defenseless. While the alien factions continued to grow bolder, humanity's creative spark grew brighter. They had turned a moment of vulnerability into an opportunity for innovation, and the results were nothing short of extraordinary. Soon, humanity's new technology began to gain recognition across the galaxy. The once powerful alien fleets that had relied on overwhelming firepower found themselves facing a new kind of enemy, one that could outsmart them, outthink them, and fight back in ways they had never anticipated. The balance of power was shifting. Where once humans had been the underdogs, they now had a fighting chance, not because they had superior weapons, but because they had superior minds. The struggle wasn't over. There were still challenges to face, still obstacles to overcome. But humanity had done something no one had expected. They had found a way to defend themselves without firearms, using nothing but their ingenuity, creativity, and determination. The first stage of their resistance had begun, and there was no turning back. The aliens, who had once underestimated humanity, would soon learn just how dangerous it could be when humans were forced to fight with nothing but their minds. The unexpected innovations that humanity had unleashed in response to the firearms ban were just the beginning. As the war for survival against alien forces raged on, a new, more surprising twist began to emerge. Humans, now armed with their creative inventions, were making an impact in ways no one could have predicted. The aliens, once confident in their technological superiority, were now starting to feel the pressure. What had begun as a defense mechanism soon transformed into a revolution that shook the very foundation of the galaxy. At the forefront of this revolution was the EMP blaster, a weapon of pure genius. Initially designed as a non-lethal way to disable enemy ships and technology, the EMP blasters had begun to evolve into a much more powerful tool. Engineers, ever determined to perfect their craft, had discovered ways to upgrade the EMP blasters. The new versions could disable entire fleets in seconds, rendering the once feared alien technologies useless. The shift was dramatic. Where once the aliens had relied on overwhelming firepower, now they were losing control of their own weapons and systems to a human-made device that had once seemed like nothing more than a temporary solution. But it wasn't just the EMP blasters that were changing the course of the war. Humans were now developing entire systems of defense that didn't rely on projectiles or explosives at all. Magnetic shields, previously thought to be an experimental curiosity, were now being used to protect entire colonies and space stations. These shields, capable of deflecting incoming attacks, provided a way to safeguard humanity's most vulnerable areas. The alien forces, who had anticipated that the ban would leave humanity defenseless, were now scrambling to figure out how to break through the defenses that were proving almost impenetrable. The true genius of humanity, however, was in their ability to adapt and evolve under pressure. They had not just created technology, they had transformed the very way they approached conflict. No longer reliant on brute force, humans were learning to use their environment to their advantage. Space itself, once a vast and hostile expanse, had become a battlefield that played to humanity's strengths. They used asteroids, debris, and even the sheer emptiness of space to outmaneuver alien forces. The humans had become masters of guerrilla warfare in the void of space, attacking and retreating with precision and speed. This new style of warfare left the aliens perplexed. They had been prepared for a traditional war, one fought with traditional weapons and strategies. Instead, they found themselves up against an enemy that could fight smarter, not harder. In the vastness of space, where every move mattered, humans had learned to use their creativity to exploit the weaknesses of their more powerful adversaries. But the true twist, the one that would ultimately shift the balance of power in the galaxy, came from a surprising source. As the battle raged on, a small group of humans, initially dismissed as eccentric scientists, uncovered a hidden potential in one of their own inventions, the energy disruptors. But the true twist, the one that would ultimately shift the balance of power in the galaxy, came from a surprising source. As the battle raged on, a small group of humans, initially dismissed as eccentric scientists, uncovered a hidden potential in one of their own inventions, the energy disruptors. Originally designed to incapacitate enemy systems, the disruptors had a unique ability to drain not only electrical energy, but also the very life force of their targets. What began as a tool for disabling enemy equipment was now revealed to have the ability to disrupt the core energy of living beings, including the aliens themselves. This revelation sent shockwaves throughout the human military. If humans could harness this technology on a large scale, they could not only defend themselves but potentially turn the tide of the war in their favor. The energy disruptors, when properly modified, could become weapons of unparalleled power, capable of weakening entire alien fleets with a single strike. The human military, already on the offensive, now found themselves with the means to strike directly at the heart of their alien enemies, undermining their physical strength and technology in one fell swoop. As the first large-scale deployment of the energy disruptors was launched, the results were staggering. Alien forces that had once seemed unstoppable were now faltering. Their powerful weapons and ships began to malfunction, and their soldiers, once feared for their strength, began to weaken under the disruptive influence of the energy blasts. The war, which had seemed impossible to win, was now tipping in humanity's favor. For the first time in history, the aliens had to confront the harsh reality. Humanity was not just surviving. They were thriving. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had now turned into a revolution that threatened the very fabric of galactic power. Humanity's creative response to the firearms ban had not only leveled the playing field, it had tilted the scales in their favor. As the tide of war began to shift, the galaxy watched in awe. The humans had taken the most desperate situation imaginable and turned it into their greatest strength. Their innovative spirit, their refusal to give up, had proven to be the ultimate weapon. The aliens who had once mocked humanity's weakness were now forced to reckon with a new reality. A reality where humanity had the power to reshape the future of the galaxy. The twist was complete. The war was far from over, but humanity had proven that when pushed to the brink, they would not just survive. They would win. The final battle for the galaxy had arrived. What had once seemed like an insurmountable challenge for humanity had turned into an unexpected series of victories, culminating in this decisive moment. The aliens, once so confident in their technological superiority, now found themselves on the defensive, their forces crippled by the very ingenuity they had underestimated. Humans, armed with their creative inventions and relentless determination, had managed to not only survive but thrive in the face of overwhelming odds. And now, with the power of the energy disruptors and EMP blasters at their disposal, humanity was about to take the final step toward victory. The battle took place in the heart of the galaxy, where the alien forces had gathered in their last attempt to crush humanity's resistance once and for all. Thousands of alien ships, armed with advanced weapons and shields, filled the skies. But what the aliens didn't know was that humanity had been preparing for this moment for months. The final assault was a massive, coordinated strike from every human colony across the galaxy. No corner of the universe was left untouched as humanity unleashed the full force of their creativity and determination. The first wave of human ships launched their EMP blasts, disabling the alien fleets with a precision no one had anticipated. The once mighty alien ships, which had once seemed invincible, now floated aimlessly in space, their systems fried and their weapons useless. The aliens, already struggling to maintain their dominance, now found themselves in a state of confusion and fear. The tide was turning, and they could feel it. But humanity didn't stop there. As the alien fleet's defenses crumbled, the second wave of attack arrived. The energy disruptors. The modified disruptors, capable of draining the very life force of the alien soldiers and their ships, proved to be the turning point. With every blast, entire sections of the alien fleet weakened, their power drained, their warriors collapsing from the sudden loss of strength. The once unstoppable alien forces were now crumbling under the weight of their own arrogance. They had underestimated the human spirit. And now, it was too late. As the battle raged on, humanity's ingenuity continued to shine. The once defenseless colonies, left vulnerable by the Galactic Council's firearm ban, had transformed into well-oiled machines of warfare. No longer dependent on brute force, humanity had learned to fight with precision, using their surroundings and their new weapons to outmaneuver and overpower their alien adversaries. The human fleet, once outnumbered and outgunned, had become a force that the alien invaders could no longer ignore. It wasn't just the humans' new weapons that were responsible for their victory. It was their resolve. Their unwavering belief in their ability to adapt, to overcome, and to rise above every challenge had driven them to this moment. As the final alien ships were disabled, the survivors began to retreat, realizing that they had been beaten not by stronger weapons, but by the very creativity and perseverance that had defined humanity since the dawn of time. As the battle ended, the galaxy fell silent. The once terrifying alien fleets were now nothing more than floating debris, and humanity stood victorious. The war that had begun with the odds stacked so heavily against them had ended with humanity as the undisputed force in the galaxy. The victory was not just a military one. It was a triumph of human spirit, ingenuity, and the unyielding belief that no matter the challenge, humanity would always find a way to prevail. The victory marked the beginning of a new era. No longer would humanity be seen as a weak, insignificant species. The aliens who had once looked down on humans were now forced to acknowledge their strength. But more than that, humanity's victory proved that creativity, not violence, could change the course of history. The Galactic Council, once a distant, untouchable entity, now found itself in a new position, one where it had to listen to humanity's voice. The laws that had restricted humanity's weapons were now seen as outdated and unnecessary. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they could defend themselves without resorting to destruction, and their ingenuity had earned them the respect of civilizations across the stars. As peace began to settle over the galaxy, humanity's place in it was forever altered. The war had taught them valuable lessons about their own capabilities. They had faced seemingly insurmountable odds and emerged victorious, not through brute strength, but through creative thinking, unity, and an unshakable will to survive. The era of guns and violence was over. A new era had begun, one where humanity's ingenuity and resourcefulness would lead the way. With the war behind them, humans turned their focus to rebuilding and exploring new frontiers in the galaxy. They had proven that they could overcome anything, even the most oppressive laws and the most powerful enemies. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, humanity would always find a way to win. The new dawn had arrived, and with it came the promise of endless possibilities. The galaxy was now a place where humans could thrive, and they had earned their place at the table. The victory was complete. The new era had begun.